Just try not to embarrass the uniform, Sergeant. All you have to do is stand there and look like you belong. Can you manage that?" The words, slick with the unearned confidence of a new lieutenant, cut through the tense air of the flight line. A few of the younger airmen nearby snickered, their eyes darting away, not wanting to be caught witnessing the casual humiliation of a senior NCO. They saw what Lieutenant Miller saw, an older woman, seams of silver in her tightly bound hair, a face etched with lines that spoke of too many sunrises in harsh places, and a posture that seemed more weary than proud. She was a relic assigned to a ceremonial post, a piece of living history put on display and expected to remain silent. But as the laughter died in the wind whipping across the tarmac, Sergeant Eva Rostova did not react. She did not flinch. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant heat haze, her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missing nothing. Her non-reaction was a vacuum, pulling all the air and noise out of the lieutenant's cheap theatrics. A more perceptive man would have recognized the danger in that stillness. A wiser man would have seen that her grip on her M4 rifle was not the stiff, unfamiliar hold of a gate guard, but the relaxed, intimate cradle of a master craftsman holding a familiar tool. He would have noticed that her uniform, though faded from countless washings, was impeccably maintained, and her boots, though scuffed, were polished to a mirror sheen. But Lieutenant Miller was neither perceptive nor wise. He saw only what his assumptions allowed him to see. He saw a problem to be managed, not a professional to be respected. The President of the United States was landing in less than an hour, and Miller, in his crisp blues and sharper ambition, wanted his perimeter flawless. Rostova, to him, was a flaw. Miller took another step closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial hiss meant to be heard by everyone. "Look, Sergeant, I don't know who you know in command to get this post, but this is my detail. My career is on the line. The President's arrival has to be perfect. Your only job is to be a statue, a silent, unmoving, and frankly, invisible statue. Do you understand me?" He tapped his polished shoe near her boot. "Your posture is lax. Straighten up." Project Authority, he saw nothing but a blank slate, a tired NCO at the end of a long, unremarkable career. He was blind to the truth written in the very fabric of her being. He could not see the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her weight, a combat stance so deeply ingrained it was as natural as breathing. He could not interpret the slow, rhythmic scan of her eyes, a sector sweep that cataloged every vehicle, every shadow, every face in the assembled crowd without conscious thought. Her silence wasn't submission, it was observation. It was the profound calm of someone who had faced down real threats and found the shouting of small men to be little more than background noise. She simply gave a single, curt nod, her lips a thin, straight line. The gesture was dismissive, an acknowledgement not of his authority, but of the fact that sound had emerged from his mouth. For Rostova, the lieutenant was just another variable in a complex environmental equation, a minor distraction to be filtered out. Her focus was absolute, her purpose clear. The world could burn down around her, and she would remain at her post, a silent sentinel, a guardian whose competence needed no announcement because it was woven into the very fiber of her soul. The injustice of the moment hung in the air, a bitter pill swallowed by the complicit silence of those who watched, yet it did not touch her. She was a mountain, and the lieutenant was just the wind, making a lot of noise but changing nothing. The distant whine of jet engines grew into a roar as the presidential aircraft, a gleaming symbol of national power, descended from the sky. The motorcade was staged, Secret Service agents moved with tense, fluid grace, and Lieutenant Miller buzzed about like an agitated hornet, his radio crackling with self-important commands. Everything was unfolding with the precise choreography of a state visit. And then, chaos erupted. It began not with a bang, but with a swerve. A black sedan from the press pool, positioned at the far edge of the tarmac, suddenly lurched forward, its engine revving erratically. It broke from its designated position, tires squealing as it accelerated directly toward the flight line, on a collision course with the now taxiing Air Force One. Panic rippled through the security detail. Voices yelled into radios. Agents drew their weapons, creating a dozen different lines of fire, a deadly web of potential friendly fire. Miller's voice, shrill with panic, barked contradictory orders. Stop that vehicle. Box it in. Set up a roadblock. His commands were useless, a frantic attempt to impose order on a situation spiraling out of his control. He was reacting to the event, not anticipating it. But one person was not reacting. Sergeant Rostova had not moved. Her head had not even turned. Only her eyes, cold and analytical, had tracked the vehicle's trajectory from the first moment of its deviation. While others saw a threat, she saw a problem with a solution. While others shouted, she calculated. The vehicle's speed, its vector, the composition of the tarmac, the location of the fuel trucks, the position of every single person on that flight line. It was all processed in the silent, supercomputer of her mind, a mind forged in crucibles Miller couldn't even imagine. In the space of 3 heartbeats, as the Secret Service prepared to unleash a volley of gunfire that could have turned the tarmac into a field of shrapnel and ignited jet fuel, Rostova acted. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. Her movements were a single, unbroken flow of pure, kinetic poetry. It was an economy of action that was both terrifying and beautiful to behold. Her right hand dropped from her rifle, her left guiding the weapon onto its sling across her back in a practiced, fluid arc. Simultaneously, her right hand found the grip of her M9 sidearm. The snap of the retention holster releasing the weapon was a sharp, definitive sound in the rising cacophony. She didn't shout a warning. She didn't seek permission. She was the authority. Her arm rose, locked, and for a fraction of a second, she was the statue Miller had demanded, but a statue of absolute purpose. 2 shots rang out, a crisp crack that was surgically precise, entirely different from the panicked roar of a firefight. The sound was so clean, so deliberate, it seemed to cut through the noise and impose its own silence. The effect was instantaneous. The black sedan's front tires, both of them, exploded in a spray of rubber. The vehicle, its steering instantly compromised, slewed sideways in a controlled skid, bleeding momentum with every foot until it scraped to a halt less than 10 yards from the wingtip of Air Force One. It sat there, steaming and crippled, a threat perfectly neutralized without a single casualty, without a single broken window on the car itself. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the scene, broken only by the hiss of the dying tires and the distant whine of the presidential jet's engines. Every head turned, every pair of eyes locked onto the solitary figure of the gate guard, who was already holstering her weapon as calmly as if she had just finished routine target practice. Lieutenant Miller stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, the radio in his hand utterly silent. The impossible had just happened, and it had been executed by the one person he had dismissed as completely irrelevant. The side door of the presidential limousine opened. Secret Service agents, their faces grim, formed a human wall, but a calm hand waved them aside. The President of the United States stepped out, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He saw the disabled car, the stunned security teams, the babbling lieutenant who was now trying to take credit for the successful containment, but the president's eyes didn't linger on the chaos. They moved past it, searching, until they found the still figure of Sergeant Rostova, who had already resumed her parade rest, her face as impassive as granite. Ignoring the frantic attempts by Lieutenant Miller to give a report, the president walked directly toward her. The world seemed to hold its breath. The agents, the airmen, the press, everyone watched as the most powerful man on the planet strode across the tarmac, his path set not for the waiting dignitaries, but for a lone, anonymous gate guard. He stopped 3 feet in front of her. He did not speak. He simply straightened his suit jacket, brought his heels together, and rendered a slow, perfect, military salute. It was a gesture of such profound and unexpected respect that it sent a shockwave through the crowd. It was an honor guard of one, for an audience of one. The president held the salute, his eyes locked on hers. Sergeant Rostova, in response, brought her own hand up in a salute that was its equal in precision and dignity. For a long moment, the two of them stood there, Commander-in-Chief and Senior NCO, locked in a silent exchange that spoke volumes more than any speech ever could. It was a recognition, a validation, a moment of pure, unadulterated respect that transcended rank, title, and station. It was a silent testament to a shared history, a debt acknowledged in the most public forum imaginable. Finally, the president lowered his hand. He turned his head slightly, his voice low but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. "Lieutenant," he said, his eyes still on Rostova. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Miller, completely flustered, stammered, "Sir, she is Sergeant Rostova, assigned to security forces." The president gave a humorless smile. "That's her name. That's not who she is." He glanced at the lead Secret Service agent. a man with a face like a roadmap of every global hotspot from the last 30 years. Agent Thorne, please enlighten the lieutenant. Pull up her file. Read the unclassified summary. Thorne produced a hardened datapad and tapped the screen. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a simple recitation of facts that were more impactful than any boast. Name, Eva Rostova. Rank, Master Sergeant, United States Army. Recalled from retirement under the Special Skills Program. Last active unit of assignment, classified. Primary military occupational specialty, 18Z, Special Forces Senior Sergeant. He paused, letting the weight of that designation settle. Notable decorations include the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Bronze Star for Valor, the Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. She is a graduate of Ranger School, Special Forces Qualification Course, and is a master-rated static line and military freefall parachutist. She is a distinguished expert with all assigned small arms. Thorne looked up from the pad. Sir, her mission history is almost entirely classified, but I can add a personal note. 10 years ago, in the Kandahar province, she was the lead operator on a protection detail for a visiting senator. When their convoy was ambushed, she shielded the senator with her own body, taking 2 rifle rounds to her side. She then eliminated the threat and coordinated the medical evacuation. The president looked directly at Miller, his eyes like ice. I was that senator, Lieutenant. The story of that moment on the tarmac spread through the base like a wildfire, then through the Air Force, and then into the quiet, professional communities where such legends are forged and cherished. It was told in hushed tones in briefing rooms, in barracks late at night, and in the encrypted chat rooms used by operators around the globe. The tale of the ghost at the gate became an instant classic, a modern military fable. It was the story of the president who knew his people, who remembered the quiet professional who had saved his life a decade earlier and paid her the respect she was due. It was the story of the 2 perfect shots that prevented a catastrophe, a demonstration of skill so sublime it bordered on the supernatural. And it was the story of the arrogant lieutenant who learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of his career, that assumptions are the enemy of truth, and that true competence is often silent. Lieutenant Miller was a changed man. The public, yet quiet, rebuke from the president had shattered his fragile ego, but in its place, something stronger began to grow. The next day, he found Sergeant Rostova at her post, the same gait, the same unwavering calm. He offered no excuses. His apology was quiet, direct, and deeply sincere. He didn't just apologize for his words. He apologized for his blindness. Sergeant, he said, his voice barely a whisper, you were a professional, and I was a fool. I failed to see. I am sorry. Eva Rostova simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. After a long moment, she gave a slight nod. You see now, Lieutenant. That is what matters. In the weeks that followed, the culture of the security squadron began to shift. The incident became a touchstone, a reference point for a new standard of professionalism. The 2 spent shell casings from Rostova's sidearm were recovered. The base commander had them mounted on a simple walnut plaque and hung in the main briefing room. Beneath them, a small brass plate was inscribed with just 2 words, Quiet Professional. It became a silent reminder to every airman who passed it. A reminder to look deeper than the uniform, to respect experience over rank, and to understand that the most effective weapon in any arsenal is a calm mind. The gate where Sergeant Rostova had stood her post was unofficially nicknamed the Ghost Gate, a tribute to the silent warrior who had appeared out of nowhere to remind them all what true strength looked like. Lieutenant Miller, for his part, began to truly lead. He started listening to his NCOs, seeking their counsel, valuing their experience. He learned that leadership wasn't about shouting orders. It was about building trust and fostering competence. He learned from Rostova's single, decisive action more than he had from 4 years at the academy. Her quiet competence became his professional compass. She never mentored him with words, but her example was a constant lesson. The lesson was simple. The noise doesn't solve the problem. The work solves the problem. And so, the legend grew, not because of what was said, but because of what was done. It was a story built on the foundation of a deafening silence, 2 perfect shots, and a single, respectful salute. A year later, Captain Miller stood before a new class of Security Forces airmen. He was a different officer now, quieter, more deliberate, his eyes holding a wisdom that went far beyond his years. He pointed to the plaque on the wall, the one with the 2 brass casings gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Before we begin, he said, his voice steady and calm, I'm going to tell you a story. It's about a master sergeant I once knew. It's about the day I learned that the most dangerous person in a room is never the loudest. They are the one you don't notice, the one who is watching, listening, and thinking. They are the quiet professional. He told them the story of Eva Rostova, of his own arrogance, and of the 2 shots that had taught him the true meaning of his oath. The story had become institutional folklore, a foundational lesson passed down to every new generation of defenders. It was a parable about the difference between authority and power, between appearance and reality. Sergeant Rostova had long since retired, disappearing back into the quiet life she had earned, leaving behind nothing but a legacy of silent strength. She had never sought the spotlight, but her actions had created a light that now guided others. Her legend served as a permanent inoculation against the disease of assumption. Her legacy was not in the medals she had won or the classified missions she had completed. It was in the changed heart of a young officer. It was in the hushed reverence of the airmen who now guarded the Ghost Gate. It was in the simple, powerful idea that a person's worth is not measured by the volume of their voice, but by the steady beat of their heart in a crisis, by the precision of their hands when lives are on the line, by the calm they project when chaos reigns. True strength doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need validation from the ignorant or applause from the crowd. It simply is. It waits, it watches, and when the moment comes, it acts with a clarity and purpose that silences all doubt. Eva Rostova was more than a soldier. She was a standard. She was a living embodiment of the creed that actions speak louder than words, and that the most profound statements are often made in complete and total silence. Her story became a quiet promise that in the heart of the institution, competence would always, eventually, be recognized, and respect would be paid where it was truly earned. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption and where silent strength defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.